A legendary horse emerges from the shadows on a cold night, guiding a lost man to an unexpected destination. But what happens next defies all the laws of nature. The biting wind of the Rocky Mountains lashed at Anthony Morrison's face as he staggered along the deserted road. His fine clothes, a custom-tailored Italian suit, offered little protection against the merciless cold of that night. The black asphalt seemed to stretch endlessly under the silvery moonlight, mocking his current predicament. How had a man who once held so much power found himself there, alone and helpless? His hesitant footsteps echoed in the silence of the night as his mind wandered through the events that had brought him to this point. The heated argument with his children, the accusations, the harsh words exchanged in the office of his mansion. And then, the dull thud of the car door closing, leaving him there alone in the middle of nowhere. The betrayal by his own family hurt more than the cold that seeped into his bones. "You're nothing but a selfish old man." The words of his youngest daughter, Emily, still reverberated in his mind. "You've always put money above everything and everyone." Peter, his eldest son, had been even crueler. "Since you love your empire so much, why don't you spend the night with it?" Anthony stopped for a moment, leaning against a mile marker. At 68 years old, his body wasn't prepared for such a long walk. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead despite the low temperature. His legs trembled, not just from exhaustion, but from the realization of how much he had failed as a father. It was then that a peculiar sound cut through the night's silence. The rhythmic echo of hooves on the asphalt made his heart race. Turning slowly, Anthony caught a glimpse of a sight that, for a moment, made him question his own sanity. A majestic black horse, standing a few meters away, its eyes gleaming like two sapphires under the moonlight. The animal observed him with a disconcerting intensity, as if it could see through his soul. Its black coat shimmered under the nightlight, creating a dramatic contrast with the fog that was beginning to form around it. Anthony took a hesitant step toward it, and to his surprise, the horse moved as well, but not to retreat. Instead, the animal began to walk slowly, stopping after a few steps to look back, as if inviting him to follow. There was something hypnotic about that gaze, an ancient wisdom that seemed to transcend the barrier between man and animal. Without fully understanding why, Anthony felt compelled to follow that mysterious creature. The horse led him off the main road onto a winding trail that snaked up the mountainside. With every step, Anthony felt he was leaving behind not just the road, but his entire previous life. The air grew thicker with mist, and the sounds of the night seemed to create a mysterious symphony around him. After what felt like an eternity, though it was probably no more than half an hour, the lights of a small property began to glow through the fog. It was a modest but well-kept farm, with a two-story main house and a few smaller buildings around. The smell of fresh coffee hung in the air, mingling with the scent of damp earth and dense forest. On the porch of the house, a middle-aged couple watched his approach with a mix of curiosity and concern. The man, who appeared to be around 50, wore simple work clothes and had calloused hands that spoke of hard labor. The woman, with a colorful shawl draped over her shoulders, had a warm expression that reminded Anthony of his own mother. "Good evening, sir." The man stepped forward, descending the porch steps. "I'm John, and this is my wife, Mary Helen. It seems the wind has brought you to us." Anthony looked back, searching for the black horse, but it had vanished into the darkness as mysteriously as it had appeared. His legs finally gave way to exhaustion, and he would have fallen if John hadn't rushed to support him. "Come, you need to warm up," Mary Helen said, already opening the door to the house. "I have hot coffee on the stove and can fix you something to eat." As he was guided into the simple yet welcoming home, Anthony felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: kindness without ulterior motives. The warmth of the lit fireplace and the aroma of homemade coffee began to thaw not just his body, but something in his heart that had been dormant for decades. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Let us know which city you're watching from and we'll continue. The steaming cup of coffee trembled slightly in his hands as Anthony observed the interior of his host's modest home. The walls, adorned with old photographs and local crafts, silently told the story of a life built on honest work and love. The contrast with his own mansion, filled with expensive art but devoid of heartfelt memories, couldn't have been greater. Mary Helen placed a plate of hot soup in front of him, the steam rising in lazy spirals before disappearing into the air. "You need to eat," she said with a maternal tone that made something inside him tighten. "Afterward, you can tell us what happened if you want, or say nothing if you prefer." John, seated across the rustic wooden table, simply watched in understanding. Silence. There was something about the man's presence that conveyed a serene wisdom, as if he perfectly understood that some stories needed time to be told. "The horse," Anthony began, his voice hoarse for the first time since he had entered the house. "Did you call him Wind?" A gentle smile formed on John's lips. "Yes, he showed up around here a few years ago. No one knows exactly where he came from. Some say he's always been here since the Rocky Mountains existed. He's a free spirit, doesn't let anyone ride or tie him down. But sometimes he guides people here," Mary Helen added, sitting beside her husband. "People who need help, even if they don't know it yet." Anthony took a spoonful of the soup, surprised by the comforting flavor that instantly transported him to his childhood on his parents' farm. Memories long buried under piles of documents and business meetings began to surface. Through the kitchen window, he could see the night outside, now even darker. The moonlight occasionally broke through the clouds, briefly illuminating the backyard, where a few chickens slept on their perch. In the distance, the neigh of a horse echoed across the property. "Have you lived here long?" Anthony asked, trying to divert attention from his own situation. "All my life," John replied, pouring himself more coffee. "This land has been in the family for 3 generations. It's not much, but it's enough for us to live well. We grow our own food, sell some of the surplus at the town market, and the rest, nature provides the rest." Mary Helen got up and went to an old cabinet, from which she took out some blankets and a clean pair of pajamas. "The guest room is always ready," she said naturally, as if welcoming strangers brought by a mysterious horse were an everyday occurrence. "You must be in need of a good rest." As he climbed the wooden stairs that creaked softly under his feet, Anthony felt a strange emotion welling up in his chest. It was a mix of shame and gratitude that made him want to cry and laugh at the same time. He, who had always prided himself on not needing anyone, now found himself completely dependent on the kindness of strangers. The room was small but cozy, with a single bed covered by a handmade patchwork quilt. A simple window opened to the vastness of the Rocky Mountains, and through it, Anthony could see the silhouettes of the mountains against the starry sky. After changing out of his expensive, dirty clothes into the simple but clean pajamas, he sat on the edge of the bed. The E-tip mattress was harder than he was used to, but at that moment, it felt like the most comfortable place in the world. His thoughts turned to his family, to the angry faces of his children, to the harsh words exchanged. A movement outside the window caught his attention. Down below, near the edge of the property where the woods began, stood Wind. The black horse remained still, his bright eyes fixed on the bedroom window like a silent guardian. Anthony felt an inexplicable connection to that majestic animal. It was as if the horse could see beyond his facade of a successful man, beyond the layers of arrogance and self-sufficiency he had built over the years. Wind seemed to see something that he himself had forgotten existed. Lying down on the bed, Anthony finally allowed exhaustion to take over. The distant sound of the stream that ran through the property blended with the chirping of crickets and the occasional neighing of Wind, creating a melody that gradually lulled him to sleep. For the first time in many years, he fell asleep without thinking about business, without worrying about the financial market, without calculating profits and losses. That night, in a simple room on a remote farm in the Rocky Mountains, Anthony Morrison, the agribusiness tycoon, slept the sleep of the just, protected by a mysterious horse and the kindness of 2 strangers who had taken him in without asking questions. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and homemade bread filled the room where Anthony slept, gently waking him for his first morning on the farm. The golden light of the rising sun filtered through the plain window, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like tiny floating diamonds. For a moment he felt disoriented, until the memories of the previous night flooded his mind. He got up carefully, feeling every muscle in his body protest from the effort of the night's walk. His fine clothes from the day before were folded on a wooden chair, clean and pressed. Mary Helen must have taken care of them while he slept. The simple act of kindness made his eyes well up. As he went downstairs, he found the kitchen empty, but the table was set and waiting for him with a handwritten note. "The coffee is in the thermos. Help yourself. We're in the garden." The familiarity of the gesture, instead of offending him as it normally would, brought an involuntary smile to his lips. After pouring himself a steaming cup of coffee and a few slices of still warm bread, Anthony walked out to the porch. The view that greeted him in the morning was breathtaking. The farm was nestled in a valley surrounded by majestic mountains, their slopes covered in lush vegetation that glistened with morning dew. The mist was slowly dissipating, revealing a deep blue sky. In the backyard, John and Mary Helen were working in a well-tended garden. The couple moved in perfect harmony, as if performing a long-rehearsed choreography. She was picking some vegetables while he watered the beds. The scene conveyed a peace that Anthony hadn't experienced in decades. "Good morning," Mary Helen waved as she noticed him. "Come see our garden." "Did you enjoy the coffee?" Anthony descended the steps of the porch, feeling the damp grass under his feet in borrowed slippers. "It was excellent," he replied, approaching. The couple. "How long have you been keeping this garden?" "Since we got married," John answered, leaning on the hoe. "We started with just a few beds, but it grew along with our love." He smiled at his wife in a way that made Anthony feel a pang of envy. When was the last time he had looked at someone like that? A familiar whinny caught his attention. Wind was standing by the fence that marked the property, his imposing figure standing out against the backdrop of the mountains. The horse watched him with those enigmatic eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets. "He's never stayed around this long," Mary Helen commented, following his gaze. "He usually only shows up when he brings someone and then disappears for weeks, but since you arrived, he hasn't left the area around the farm." John wiped his hands on the apron he was wearing and approached Anthony. "You know, there's something we need to tell you about Wind, something that happened a few years ago when he first appeared here." The couple led Anthony to a rustic bench under a leafy tree. Mary Helen brought more coffee, and John began to tell a story that would make Anthony question everything he believed about coincidences. "It was on a night much like last night," John began. "Mary Helen had gone out to check on one of our mares that was about to give birth. The fog was especially thick, and she ended up getting lost on her way back. The trails in the mountains can be treacherous even for those who know them well." Mary Helen took her husband's hand, her eyes lost in the memories. "I was completely disoriented, walking blindly. That's when I heard the hooves. At first I was scared, but then I saw those glowing eyes in the darkness. Vento appeared like a guardian, guiding me back home. Ever since then," John continued, "he mysteriously shows up whenever someone needs help. It's as if he can sense people's suffering, as if he has a mission." Anthony listened intently, his analytical mind struggling to find a logical explanation for all of it. As a man accustomed to controlling every aspect of his life through the power of money, the idea of something so mystical deeply unsettled him. It was then that a distant noise caught his attention. The familiar sound of an approaching helicopter made his heart race. For the first time since he had arrived at the ranch, the outside world threatened to invade this sanctuary of peace he had found. The helicopter circled the valley, descending lower and lower, its intrusive presence shattering the natural harmony of the place. John and Mary Helen exchanged worried glances, while Anthony remained still, his face a mask of tension. The mechanical noise seemed even more invasive in that pastoral setting. "It must be the company that's been buying up land in the area," John commented, though his tone suggested he didn't truly believe it. "They've been showing up frequently lately." Vento, who had been calm near the fence, became visibly agitated. The horse reared up, its majestic silhouette outlined against the morning sky, before galloping toward the dense forest. Something about the animal's behavior stirred a deep unease in Anthony. "What company is that?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual as he watched the helicopter move away. Mary Helen sighed, letting her concern show. "An outside corporation. They arrived a few months ago offering to buy land from small landowners. They say they want to develop the region, build luxury resorts. She paused, looking at the mountains. But there's something strange about all of this. John nodded in agreement. They seem especially interested in the areas where the wild horses usually appear. And ever since they started surveying the region, some animals have mysteriously disappeared. The mention of the missing horses made Anthony remember something he had long tried to forget. An old conversation with his late wife, Claire, about a special place in the Rocky Mountains that she used to visit in her youth, a hidden valley where wild horses lived freely. "Have you ever heard of a secret valley?" he asked suddenly, surprising himself. "A place where the wild horses take refuge?" The couple exchanged a meaningful glance before John responded. "There are legends. They say that somewhere in these mountains there's a natural sanctuary protected by forces we don't understand. Some claim that wind is the guardian of that place." At that moment, the old radio in the kitchen, always tuned to a local station, caught everyone's attention with a news report that made Anthony's blood run cold. The search continues for businessman Anthony Morrison, who has been missing for 2 days. His children, Peter and Emily Morrison, express concern over their father's mental state, which, according to them, has been erratic since the family business began facing financial difficulties. Mary Helen quickly turned off the radio, but the damage was already done. A heavy silence fell over the kitchen as the couple processed the information. Anthony felt the weight of their gazes, but found no judgment in them, only a silent understanding. "So you're Anthony Morrison," John finally said, not as a question but as a statement. "The man who turned a small farm into one of the largest agribusiness empires in the country." Anthony nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his identity pressing down on his shoulders once more. "Yes, it's me, or at least it was until my own children decided I was no longer fit to run the business." "And was it them who left you on the road last night?" Mary Helen asked, her gentle voice masking the indignation she felt. Before Anthony could respond, a familiar sound of hooves caught his attention. Wind had returned and was now standing near the kitchen window, his eyes fixed on Anthony as if calling to him. The businessman felt an inexplicable connection with the animal, as if it understood his situation perfectly. "You know," John began, observing the interaction between man and animal, "they say wind only appears to people who carry a greater purpose than they can comprehend at the moment. He guides them not just to a safe place, but to a path of transformation." John's words resonated deeply with Anthony, stirring long-buried memories. He remembered Claire, his wife, passionately speaking about nature preservation, about how true progress should walk in harmony with the environment. At the time, he was too busy expanding his business to listen to her words. The afternoon slowly progressed at the ranch as Anthony helped John repair a fence near the pasture. His hands, accustomed only to signing documents and handling electronic devices, now held heavy tools. The physical labor, though tiring, brought a satisfaction he hadn't felt in years. "Your wife, Claire," John began as he hammered a board. "She used to come to this area often, didn't she?" The question caught Anthony off guard, making him almost drop the hammer he was holding. "How do you know that?" he asked, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. John leaned on the newly repaired fence, his gaze lost in the distant mountains. "Many years ago, a young woman used to appear around here. She would spend hours photographing the wild horses and talking to the locals about the importance of preserving the area. I only made the connection now when I heard your name on the radio." Anthony felt his heart race. Claire had never mentioned knowing people from the region. She only spoke passionately about a special place in the mountains that needed to be protected. At the time, he was too busy building his empire to pay attention to her preservationist dreams. "Mary Helen," John called to his wife, who appeared on the porch, "can you bring that old box from the attic, the one with the photos of the horse girl?" As they waited, John continued, "Your wife was a woman ahead of her time, Anthony. She understood that these mountains hold secrets that money can't buy." Mary Helen returned with a dusty wooden box, its hinges creaking as it was opened. Inside, dozens of black and white photographs revealed a young, radiant Claire surrounded by the lush nature of the Rocky Mountains. In several images, wild horses appeared in the background, and in one of them, Anthony noticed something that made his heart stop. A black horse, identical to Wind, standing majestically beside his late wife. "Impossible," he murmured, picking up the photograph with trembling hands. "This photo must be over 30 years old." "Time works differently in these mountains," Mary Helen said softly. "Some say Wind is more than just a horse. He is the guardian spirit of this place, protecting not only the animals but also the dreams of those who truly love these lands." The sound of an engine interrupted the conversation. A car was approaching down the dirt road, kicking up dust. It was a luxurious pickup truck, the kind executives use to visit rural areas. Anthony immediately recognized the company logo emblazoned on the side, Vertex Developments. "It's them," John said, his voice filled with concern. "The company that's been buying up the land. They arrived a few months ago with promises of development and progress, but since then all we've seen is destruction." 3 men stepped out of the vehicle, all wearing impeccable suits that contrasted sharply with the rural surroundings. The one who appeared to be the leader approached with an artificial smile on his face. "Good afternoon. I'm Richard Mendez, Expansion Director at Vertex Developments. We're visiting all the properties in the area to discuss our proposal for sustainable development." Anthony watched carefully as John and Mary Helen exchanged uneasy glances. Something about Richard's speech sounded all too familiar. It was the same kind of talk he himself had used so many times to convince small landowners to sell their properties. "We are not interested in selling," John replied firmly. "This land has been in our family for generations." Richard kept his smile, but his eyes hardened. "I understand your sentimental attachment, but you need to think about progress. Our company has ambitious plans to transform this region into a luxury tourist hub." It was then that one of the other men, who had been further away photographing the property, let out an exclamation of surprise. "Mr. Mendez, look at that!" Everyone turned to see Wind standing majestically atop a nearby hill, his silhouette outlined against the afternoon sky. Richard Mendez seemed momentarily disconcerted. "So the rumors are true," he murmured, more to himself than to the others. "He really exists." Anthony noticed something strange in the way the Vertex men observed the horse. It wasn't just admiration or surprise. There was something more, something calculating in their gazes that left him deeply unsettled. After the Vertex men left, leaving behind veiled promises and subtle threats in the air, Anthony couldn't shake the way they had looked at Wind. There was something familiar about that greed, something he recognized from his own years of building his empire. "They're not just interested in the land, are they?" asked John as they walked back to the house. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink that reflected in the windows of the farm. John shook his head. "There are rumors that they're capturing wild horses from the region. They say they're conducting genetic tests, looking for something specific. And ever since they started showing up around here, they've shown a particular interest in Wind." Mary Helen, who was waiting for them on the porch with a pitcher of iced tea, added, "Last week, Mr. Benedito's son, who lives on the other side of the mountains, saw strange men setting up camp near the trails where the wild horses usually pass. They had sophisticated equipment, radios, and something that looked like tracking gear." Anthony poured himself some tea, his mind working quickly. Years of experience in business had taught him to recognize when there was more at stake than met the eye. "Have you heard of Helen Vertex?" The couple exchanged curious glances, shaking their heads. "She was a brilliant geneticist," Anthony continued, his memories drifting back to a nearly forgotten time. 30 years ago, she developed a theory about a unique lineage of horses that would exist only in these mountains. According to her, these animals possessed extraordinary genetic traits, greater endurance, exceptional intelligence, and a lifespan far beyond the norm. "What happened to her?" Mary Helen asked, leaning forward with interest. "No one knows for sure. She disappeared during an expedition in these mountains, leaving behind only her notes and theories. The scientific community considered her ideas too fantastical, and the case was forgotten." Anthony paused, taking a sip of tea. "But now, with the appearance of this company that bears her surname..." A distant neigh interrupted his words. Wind had reappeared at the edge of the property, but this time he wasn't alone. By his side, a lame horse precariously balanced on its 3 good legs, the 4th showing a recent injury. Without hesitation, John ran into the house and returned with a veterinary first aid kit. "We need to help him," he said, already heading toward the horses. To everyone's surprise, Wind stayed by the injured animal's side, as if understanding that they needed to assist it. While John and Mary Helen tended to the injured horse, Anthony noticed something strange about its wound. "This wasn't an accident," he murmured, examining it more closely. "It looks like a trap mark." The couple exchanged worried glances. "It's not the first," John revealed. "In the past few weeks, other horses have shown up with similar injuries, always near the areas where Vertex has shown interest." That night, after the injured horse had been properly treated and settled in the stable, Anthony remained on the porch, gazing at the stars. The photographs of Claire, Vertex's suspicious interest, the injured horses, everything was starting to form a troubling puzzle. It was then that he noticed a metallic glint near the spot where they had found the injured horse. Grabbing a flashlight, he cautiously approached. Half buried in the dirt was a small electronic device, the kind used for tracking. "John," he called, his voice urgent. "I think we need to have a serious talk about what's really going on in these mountains." The couple joined him, and under the flashlight's beam, they examined the device. It was sophisticated, clearly for professional use, and had a symbol engraved on it, a stylized V, the same as Vertex developments. "There's one more thing you need to see," Mary Helen said, her voice trembling. She quickly went inside and returned with an old notebook, its pages yellowed with age. "I found this among the things your wife left here years ago. I think it's time for you to know the whole truth." In the flickering light of the lantern on the porch, Anthony held Claire's diary with trembling hands. The worn, leather-bound notebook had a peculiar smell of old paper and stored memories. Mary Helen served another round of tea, while John settled into the rocking chair, the night's silence broken only by the crickets and the occasional neighing of horses in the stable. "She started writing this diary the first time she came to the Rocky Mountains," Mary Helen explained softly. "I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment for it to come to light." Anthony opened the diary, immediately recognizing Claire's delicate handwriting. The first entry was dated 25 years ago. "Today, I found the secret valley. After months of following the stories of the locals about mysterious horses, I finally discovered this incredible place. The valley is hidden among the mountains, protected by rock formations that make it almost invisible to those who don't know where to look. And the horses, they're unlike anything I've ever seen. There's something special about them, especially the black stallion that seems to be their guardian. His eyes hold an ancient wisdom, as if they guard secrets beyond our understanding." The following pages revealed a world that Claire had kept secret throughout her marriage. She described in detail her discoveries about the wild horses of the Rocky Mountains, their unique characteristics, and their special connection to the place. "Helen Vertex was right," he read aloud, reaching a passage that made his heart race. "These horses are truly extraordinary. I've observed some that must be over 40 years old and still display the vigor of young colts. Their intelligence is remarkable. They work together in ways that defy the normal behavior of the species. But the most impressive is their ability to heal. Today, I saw one of them recover from an injury that should have taken weeks to heal in just a few days." John leaned forward, in his chair. Claire was determined to protect this place. She began mapping the entire region, documenting not only the horses but also the unique medicinal plants that grow in the valley. Anthony continued flipping through the journal, arriving at an entry that made him stop abruptly. "I discovered something disturbing today. HV did not disappear by accident. I found her last notes hidden in a cave near the valley. She had discovered that the secret of the horses is tied to this specific place. Something in the composition of the soil, the plants, the water. It's a unique ecosystem that cannot be replicated in a lab. I fear that if the wrong people find out about this..." Helen Vertex was silenced, Mary Helen said softly. She refused to reveal the exact location of the valley, to people who wanted to exploit the horses commercially. The following pages of the journal contained detailed maps and specific notes about trails and natural landmarks. Claire had created a complete guide to finding the secret valley, but in a way that only someone who truly cared about preserving the place could decipher. "Wind," Anthony murmured, reaching the last pages. "Clara mentions him constantly. The same horse. All these years. He's the guardian," John stated with conviction. "Some say he's the same horse that accompanied Helen Vertex in her research. Others believe he's much older than that." A sudden noise from the stable interrupted the conversation. It was a warning whinny, followed by the sound of footsteps in the darkness. Wind appeared at the edge of the circle of light cast by the lantern, his eyes glowing with an unusual urgency. "Something's wrong," Mary Helen said, standing up quickly. "He never behaves like this without a reason." Anthony closed the diary and carefully tucked it into his pocket. The distant sound of engines confirmed his fears. Someone was approaching the ranch in the middle of the night. Through the darkness, they could make out the glow of headlights moving along the dirt road that led to the more remote areas of the Rocky Mountains. The headlights snaked along the dirt road, drawing closer and closer to the ranch. John quickly extinguished the lantern, plunging the porch into darkness. In the stable, the horses grew restless, uneasy at the approach of the vehicles. "There are 3 trucks," whispered Mary Helen, who could better distinguish the outlines, "in the dark. And it looks like there's a larger truck behind them." Anthony felt his heart race as he recognized the Vertex Developments logo on the vehicles that now stopped near the entrance to the property. Richard Mendez stepped out of the first truck, accompanied by several men carrying strange equipment. "Good evening," Richard's voice sounded falsely cordial in the darkness. "I apologize for the unusual hour, but we need to conduct some urgent topographic studies in the area." John stepped forward to the edge of the porch, his stance firm despite the intimidating situation. "This is private property. You have no right to be here at this hour." "Actually," Richard replied, his tone shifting to something more threatening, "we have government authorization to conduct research throughout this area, and we believe you're hiding something very important." It was then that Anthony noticed what was on the truck. It was some kind of horse trailer, large enough to carry several animals. His stomach tightened as he realized the true intentions of this late-night visit. "The horses," he murmured to John and Mary Helen. "They came for the horses." As if responding to his realization, Vento emerged from the shadows, positioning himself between the Vertex group and the stable. His stance was imposing, defiant, his eyes glowing with a supernatural intensity in the darkness. "There he is," one of the men exclaimed, pointing an electronic device toward the horse. "It's the specimen we've been looking for." Richard took a step forward, his eyes fixed on Wind. "You know, it's interesting how certain stories connect. Helen Vertex wasn't crazy when she talked about extraordinary horses in these mountains. And now, after 30 years, we've finally found living proof of her theories." "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Anthony spoke up, stepping down from the porch to join John. "My wife, Claire—" "Ah, yes, Claire Morrison," Richard interrupted with a cruel smile. "Another idealist who believed some horses were too special to be studied. But now with today's technology, imagine what we could discover by analyzing the DNA of these animals. The commercial possibilities are endless." The men began to spread out across the property, carrying nets and capture equipment. Mary Helen ran to the stable, determined to protect the injured horse they had rescued earlier. Then something extraordinary happened. Wind reared up, letting out a neigh that echoed through the mountains like an ancient call. The sound reverberated across the valley, and for a moment everyone froze, as if time itself had been suspended. From the tops of the surrounding hills, dozens of pairs of eyes began to glow in the darkness. One by one, wild horses emerged from the shadows, descending the slopes toward the property. There weren't just 2 or 3, but dozens of them, moving in perfect synchrony, as if guided by a single mind. "My God," whispered one of the Vertex men, dropping his equipment. "They're surrounding us." Richard tried to maintain control of the situation, but his discomfort was evident. "Don't be ridiculous, they're just horses. Grab the tranquilizers and—" Her words were cut off by another whinny from Wind. Like a synchronized wave, The wild horses began moving in tighter and tighter circles around the intruders. The sound of their hooves created a menacing percussion that made the ground tremble. If this story intrigued you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Let us know which city you're watching from, and let's continue. The spectacle was surreal. Dozens of wild horses led by wind had formed a perfect circle around the vertex intruders. The moonlight, now more intense, revealed the majesty of those animals. Some black as night, others with coats that shimmered in silvery tones, all moving with a coordination that defied understanding. "This is impossible," murmured Richard, his face pale in the moonlight. "Horses don't act like this naturally. They can't have this level of organization." Anthony stepped forward, Claire's journal weighing heavily in his pocket as a reminder of everything at stake. "You don't understand. This place, these horses, they're part of something much bigger than your business plans." Mary Helen emerged from the stable, carrying something in her hands, an old yellowed folder. "I found this hidden between the ceiling planks," she said, handing the material to Anthony. "Claire left it here the last time she visited." With trembling hands, Anthony opened the folder. Inside were documents, scientific analyses, and most importantly, the original notes of Helen Vertex. The pages revealed an extraordinary discovery that went far beyond the special genetics of the horses. "The valley is a sacred place," he read aloud, his eyes scanning the notes. "The unique composition of the soil, the confluence of underground water currents, and a rare species of plant that grows only here have created a micro-ecosystem unlike any other in the world. The horses are not just products of this environment. They are its guardians, evolved over centuries to protect this delicate balance." Richard let out a nervous laugh, but his eyes betrayed his fear. "This is ridiculous. We're a serious company. We don't believe in fairy tales about magical horses and sacred valleys." It was then that Wind stepped forward, his hooves striking the ground with a force that seemed to make the earth itself tremble. The other horses responded to his silent command, tightening the circle even more. The air felt electric, charged with an ancient and powerful energy. John, who had been observing everything in silence, finally spoke. "Helen Vertex understood that this place couldn't be exploited. She chose to protect the secret, even if it meant abandoning years of research." "And Claire," Anthony continued, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place in his mind. "Claire discovered the truth and decided to carry on Helen's work. That's why she came to this region so often, why she spoke with such passion about preserving these lands." One of the Vertex men, holding a rifle loaded with tranquilizer darts, made a move to aim it at Wind. Before he could complete the motion, thunder echoed through the valley, and a sudden rain began to fall, as if nature itself were responding to the threat. The wild horses began to neigh in unison, creating a supernatural harmony that blended with the sound of the storm. The rain now poured down in full force, turning the ground into a muddy mess that made any attempt at capture impossible. "Mr. Mendez," one of the men shouted in panic, "the equipment! The rain will ruin everything!" Richard looked around, realizing he was losing control of the situation. His men were already running back to the vehicles, frightened by the display of power from the horses and the sudden fury of the elements. It was in that moment that Anthony had an epiphany. All his achievements, the entire empire he had built, seemed insignificant in the face of the grandeur he was witnessing. Claire had understood this years before. There were things in the world that could not be bought, sold, or exploited. "You have two choices, Richard," Anthony said, his voice carrying an authority that did not come from money or power, but from a deeper understanding. "You can leave here now with your men and equipment and never return, or you can try to continue with your plans and face not only these horses, but also the full power of this valley." The rain continued to fall, but now it had a different rhythm, almost musical, as if nature itself was singing an ancient song of power and protection. The wild horses remained in their places, their wet coats glistening under the occasional flashes of lightning, creating a spectacle of light and shadow that no artist could recreate. Richard Mendez looked at his soaked men, at the expensive equipment being ruined by the rain, and then at Wind, who watched him with those ancient eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the world. For the first time in his life, the seasoned, businessman felt truly small. "This isn't over," he said, trying to maintain a last trace of authority in his voice. "We have contracts, permits, which can be challenged," Anthony interrupted, stepping forward in the rain. "Especially when it's revealed that you were planning to capture protected species in the middle of the night, using illegal methods." Mary Helen appeared beside Anthony, holding more protected documents in a plastic folder. Claire didn't just leave behind research and maps. She registered this entire area as a private natural reserve before she left. "All the documents are here, perfectly legal and up to date." Richard's face paled even more upon hearing that. His empire of papers and contracts was beginning to crumble before something far older and more powerful than any human law. "Let's go," he finally ordered his men, his voice almost lost in the noise of the storm. One by one, the Vertex vehicles turned around and left, their headlights disappearing into the darkness of the rainy night. As soon as the last vehicle vanished from sight, something extraordinary happened. The rain, which had been pouring relentlessly, began to gradually subside. The wild horses, still in formation, began to neigh in a harmony that felt like a celebration. "Come on," John called, pointing to something beyond the horses. "I think Wind wants to show us something." The black stallion had separated from the group and was now heading toward a trail that climbed the mountain. His wet coat reflected the moonlight that began to break through the clouds, creating a silvery path that invited them to follow. Anthony, John, and Mary Helen followed Wind up the slippery trail. The other wild horses accompanied them from a distance, like a silent honor guard. As they ascended, the air grew thinner and a gentle mist began to form around them. After what felt like an eternity of walking, they reached a high clearing. The mist dissipated like curtains opening, revealing a sight that took everyone's breath away. Below them stretched the secret valley Claire had described in her diary. It was a place of indescribable beauty, a lush plain surrounded by protective mountains, crisscrossed by crystal-clear streams that shimmered under the moonlight. Rare flowers covered the field in a multicolored carpet, and at the center of the valley, an ancient rock formation rose like a natural altar. "The sanctuary," whispered Mary Helen, her voice choked with emotion. Claire always said that when the right time came, the valley itself would reveal itself to those who were worthy of protecting it. Wind walked to the edge of the cliff and neighed, a sound that echoed through the valley like a trumpet announcing a new era. Dozens of other horses emerged from the farthest corners of the valley, joining the chorus in a natural symphony that made the mountains themselves vibrate. Anthony felt tears streaming down his face. There, in that magical moment, he finally understood what Claire had been trying to tell him all those years. True wealth wasn't in the empires he had built, but in the preservation of sacred places. Like this, in protecting mysteries that money couldn't buy. Dawn found Anthony sitting on the porch of the ranch, Claire's diary in his lap and a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. The previous night seemed like a distant dream, but the hoofprints in the muddy ground and the documents scattered on the table confirmed the reality of the extraordinary events they had witnessed. Mary Helen was preparing breakfast in the kitchen, while John checked on the horses in the stable. The injured animal they had rescued was showing a remarkable recovery, confirming Claire's notes about the extraordinary abilities of those magnificent creatures. "The radio is announcing that Vertex Developments has cancelled all their projects in the region," Mary Helen commented, bringing a basket of fresh bread to the porch. "It seems they're facing an investigation for irregular practices." Anthony nodded, flipping through the pages of Claire's diary once more. Each word now made even more sense, like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. His wife had not been just a romantic dreamer, as he had often thought. She was a visionary who had seen something precious that needed to be protected. "I found this among the last pages," he said, pulling a sealed envelope from the diary. Name was written on the front in Claire's elegant handwriting. With trembling hands, he opened the envelope and began to read, "My dearest Anthony, if you are reading this letter, it means you have finally found your way to the valley. I know it may seem like madness, but this place has a greater purpose than we can comprehend. The horses, especially Wind, are not just extraordinary animals. They are guardians of a precious balance that must be preserved. I spent years documenting and protecting this sanctuary, following in the footsteps of Helen Vertex. She did not disappear as everyone thinks. She chose to become the first human guardian of the valley, living in harmony with the horses and protecting their secrets. Now the time has come to pass this legacy forward. You have always been a man of vision, capable of building empires. But there are other kinds of wealth in the world, treasures that cannot be measured in money or power. In the drawer of my old office behind the wooden panel, I left all the necessary documents to turn these lands into a permanent reserve. There is also a secret bank account with enough funds to ensure its preservation for generations. This is my true legacy to you, my love. Not an empire of concrete and business, but a sanctuary of life and mystery, with eternal love, Claire. Silent tears streamed down Anthony's face as he finished reading. John and Mary Helen respected his moment of emotion, remaining silent. The sound of approaching hooves caught everyone's attention. Wind stood near the porch, but this time he was not alone. Beside him was a mare with a golden coat like the rising sun. She was a creature of extraordinary beauty, with eyes that seemed to hold the same ancient wisdom as Wind. "It's Helen," Mary Helen whispered, her voice filled with awe. "The golden mare from the oldest legends of the mountains. They say she only appears when great changes are about to happen." Anthony stood up slowly, approaching the two horses. Something about their presence conveyed a sense of peace and purpose that he had never experienced in all his years of business achievements. "I think I know what I need to do," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion. "Claire left a plan, a path to follow. And for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm about to build something truly meaningful." The sun was now high in the sky, bathing the valley in a golden light that seemed to bless this moment of transformation. The two mystical horses remained there, silent witnesses to a man who had finally found his true purpose. The news of Anthony Morrison's arrival at the small ranch in the Rocky Mountains didn't take long to spread. On a sunny morning, a week after the events with Vertex, the sound of cars climbing the dirt road announced expected, but not necessarily welcome visitors. Peter and Emily, Anthony's children, emerged from a luxury car, their faces a mix of concern and guilt. Behind them, another vehicle carried lawyers and executives from the family business. "Dad!" Emily was the first to speak, running toward him. Her expensive clothes and high heels seemed absurdly out of place in that rural setting. "We were so worried. Why didn't you contact us?" Anthony, who was feeding the horses in the stable, calmly continued his task before turning to face them. His children barely recognized him, not by his physical appearance, but by the aura of serenity that now surrounded him. "Concerned about me or about control of the company?" he asked without hostility, simply stating a fact. Peter stepped forward, his face red with shame. "Father, we made a terrible mistake. What we did is unforgivable." "The board is in panic," one of the executives interjected, stepping forward with a folder of documents. "The stocks have plummeted since your disappearance. We need your signature to—" "No," Anthony interrupted him gently. "You don't need any of that." At that moment, Wind emerged from the nearby forest, his majestic presence drawing everyone's gaze. The black horse walked calmly until he stopped beside Anthony, like a silent guardian. "My God," Emily whispered, her eyes wide. "Is it true then? The stories about a mystical horse in the mountains?" John and Mary Helen, who had been watching the scene from the porch, approached carrying Claire's diary and the documents she had left behind. Anthony took the materials and handed them to his children. "Your mother left a legacy far greater than fortunes or companies," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "She discovered something precious here, something that needs to be protected. And now I understand that this is the true empire I must build." As Peter and Emily flipped through the diary, Anthony explained his new project: to transform the entire region into a protected natural reserve, a sanctuary for wild horses, and a research center for natural medicine based on the unique plants of the valley. "But father," Peter protested, "what about the company, our inheritance?" "The true inheritance isn't in buildings or stocks," Anthony replied, gesturing to the vastness of the Rocky Mountains around them. "It's here, in this sacred place your mother loved so much. And you have a choice to make. You can join me on this new journey, or continue down the path you've chosen." As if responding to her words, other wild horses began to emerge from the forest, creating a spectacle of beauty and freedom that left everyone speechless. The golden mare, whom the locals called Helen, appeared beside Wind, completing the mystical scene. Emily was the first to approach one of the horses, tears streaming down her face. "I remember," she said softly. "Mom used to tell us stories about magical horses when we were little. We thought they were just fairy tales." Peter also seemed transformed by the scene. He approached his father and, for the first time in years, truly embraced him. "Forgive me, Dad," he whispered. "I think we all lost our way at some point." The executives and lawyers watched the scene with discomfort, their documents and contracts seeming insignificant in the face of the magic unfolding before them. One by one, they began to quietly withdraw, realizing there was no longer room there for their corporate concerns. 6 months had passed since that morning of reconciliation. The valley now pulsed with renewed energy, transformed by the project that Anthony, his children, and the farming couple had built together. The old farm of John and Mary Helen had become the administrative center of the newly established Guardian Valley Natural Sanctuary. Emily, who had abandoned her career in finance, now coordinated research projects on the valley's medicinal plants. Her former obsession with profits had given way to a genuine passion for preservation and the study of the healing properties of the local flora. "It's incredible," she remarked to her father as they walked along a newly marked trail. "Some of these species are unique in the world. The university researchers are amazed by the possibilities." Peter, in turn, had redirected his business talent toward fundraising and sustainable partnerships. Under his management, the sanctuary had established connections with research institutions and environmental organizations worldwide, ensuring its preservation for future generations. "You know, Dad," he said one afternoon as they watched a group of wild horses grazing peacefully, "I think I finally understand what Mom always tried to teach us. True wealth lies in preserving, not in possessing." The valley had flourished in surprising ways. Small sustainable structures had been built to house researchers and scholars, all designed to have the least possible impact on the environment. A recovery center for injured or abandoned horses had been established, always respecting the wild nature of the animals. John and Mary Helen remained the heart of the project. Their knowledge of the land and their connection with the wild horses were essential to maintaining the balance between the sanctuary's development and the preservation of its mystical essence. "It's as if the valley itself is celebrating," Mary Helen remarked one afternoon, observing a rare phenomenon: flowers that normally didn't bloom at the same time of year now painted the fields with a kaleidoscope of colors. Vento remained a constant presence, though more distant. The black stallion appeared regularly, always accompanied by the golden mare, as if inspecting the progress of the changes. The sanctuary staff had learned to respect his mysterious nature, understanding that he was not a tourist attraction, but an ancestral guardian. On a particularly significant morning, Anthony found something special during his daily walk through the valley. Near the rock formation that resembled a natural altar, a small plant was growing among the stones. It was a species Claire had described in her diary, considered extinct for decades. "It's a sign," John said when Anthony showed him the discovery. "The valley is regenerating, returning to what it was before human greed tried to control it." The news of the rare plant's resurgence spread quickly through the scientific community. More than a botanical discovery, it was a symbol of hope and renewal. The valley was not just a sanctuary for wild horses, but a living testament that nature, when respected and protected, had an extraordinary power to heal and regenerate. In an intimate ceremony, Anthony and his children decided to create a foundation in the name of Claire and Helen Vertex. The goal was to ensure that the preservation work would continue through the generations, keeping alive the legacy of the two women who first recognized the importance of that sacred place. The Claire Helen Foundation will be dedicated not only to environmental preservation, Anthony announced during the small celebration, but also to the research and documentation of traditional knowledge about the region. Every story, every legend, every observation from the local residents is a fundamental part of this heritage. That night, as the sun set over the valley, a unique spectacle unfolded. Dozens of wild horses, led by Vento and the Golden Mare, gathered in the central field of the sanctuary. Their harmonious neighs echoed through the mountains like an ancient song of celebration. The first year of the Guardian Valley Natural Sanctuary was coming to an end, and with it an extraordinary transformation had been completed. Not only in the valley and its inhabitants, but especially in the people who now dedicated their lives to its preservation. On a special night, when the full moon bathed the mountains in its silvery light, Anthony gathered his family and friends for an intimate celebration. The chosen location was the same high point where, months earlier, wind had guided them to their first glimpse of the secret valley. "A year ago," he began, his voice filled with emotion, "I was a lost man abandoned on a dark road. I thought I had lost everything. My company, my family, my purpose. But in truth, I was about to find something far more precious." Emily and Peter, sitting close to their father, smiled with tears in their eyes. Their transformation had been as profound as their father's. The relentless young executive and the ambitious heir had given way to more conscious individuals, connected to something greater than themselves. "Claire always said," Mary Helen added, serving herbal tea made from plants harvested in the valley, "that this place had the power to awaken the best in people, that all it took was being open to hearing its song." As if responding to her words, a soft sound began to echo through the valley. It was an ethereal melody, created by the combination of the wind in the trees, the flowing waters of the streams, and the movement of the wild horses on the plains below. Then something unforgettable happened. Wind and the Golden Mare emerged from the night mist, but this time they were not alone. Behind them, dozens of wild horses moved in formation, their coats shimmering under the moonlight as if made of liquid light. The animals began an ancient dance, moving in circular patterns that seemed to tell a wordless story. It was as if they were celebrating not only the preservation of the valley, but the rebirth of a sacred connection between humans and nature. "Look!" Peter pointed to the center of the horse formation. In the midst of the mystical dance, small lights began to float, like fireflies dancing to the rhythm of the natural melody. The air was charged with an ancient and powerful energy. John, who had remained silent while watching the spectacle, finally spoke. "The ancients said that when the guardians dance, it is because balance has been restored. The valley recognizes its new protectors." Anthony felt a familiar presence by his side. It was a sensation he had experienced before, during the most important moments of his life. "Claire is here," he whispered, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude. "She always has been." The dance of the horses continued late into the night, their graceful forms weaving patterns of light and shadow under the moonlight. It was a celebration of life, renewal, and hope. A living reminder that there are mysteries in the world that cannot be explained, only honored and protected. Emily, who had brought her mother's diary, opened it to the last page and read aloud. Claire's final words, "The valley belongs to no one because it belongs to everyone. It is not just a place, but a guardian of ancient memories, of forgotten wisdom. Those who learn to listen to its song, who choose to protect its mysteries, will be forever transformed. For in the dance of the wild horses, in the music of the wind through the mountains, in the glow of the moon on the crystal-clear waters, lies a deeper truth than any material wealth. We are all part of something greater, something sacred, something eternal." Claire's words echoed through the valley like a blessing, sealing a pact between the new guardians and that magical place. The empire Anthony had built over his lifetime had transformed into something far more meaningful, a sanctuary not just for the wild horses, but for all those seeking reconnection with the ancient wisdom of the land. 5 years had passed since the night of the Guardian's dance. The Guardian Valley Natural Sanctuary had become a global model for environmental preservation and sustainable development. Researchers from various countries visited the site, studying not only the extraordinary horses and unique medicinal plants, but also the perfect balance between environmental protection and conscious progress. On a special spring morning, Anthony walked along one of the valley's trails, accompanied by his 7-year-old granddaughter Laura, Emily's daughter. The girl had inherited the same special connection to the place that her grandmother Claire had demonstrated so many years before. "Grandpa, Laura asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Is it true that it was wind who brought you here?" Anthony smiled, watching as the first rays of morning sunlight danced among the leaves of the ancient trees. "Yes, sweetheart. When I was lost, not just on the path but in life, he appeared as a guardian to guide me." At that moment, as if it had heard its name, the majestic black horse emerged from a nearby grove. Her eyes, still holding that ancient wisdom, gently rested on the girl. By her side, as always, was the golden mare. "Look, Grandpa," Laura whispered excitedly, pointing at something extraordinary. Behind the two mystical horses, a foal with a unique coat, blending the black of wind and the gold of Helen, played among the wildflowers. "The cycle continues," a familiar voice remarked. It was John, now with completely white hair, but still carrying that serene energy that defined him. With each generation, the guardians renew themselves. The valley had become a place of stories and miracles. The rare plants Claire had documented in her diary now bloomed in abundance. The wild horses, protected and free, multiplied naturally. The Claire Helen Foundation had become a benchmark in environmental conservation and scientific research. Emily now coordinated an international team of researchers, blending traditional knowledge with modern science. Peter had completely transformed his business vision, developing programs that allowed other natural areas to follow the sanctuary's model. In the visitor center, built with sustainable techniques that respected the natural landscape, a permanent exhibition told the story of the valley. Claire's diary held a place of honor, alongside the original research of Helen Vertex. Old photographs showed the evolution of the place and the people who protected it. "You know, Laura," Anthony said to his granddaughter as they watched the foal play, "there's a very special magic in this place. It's not the kind of magic from fairy tales, but something deeper. It's the magic of nature, of balance, of renewal." The girl nodded with wisdom beyond her years. "It's like Mom always says, the valley sings to those who know how to listen." That afternoon, as the sun began its descent on the horizon, painting the sky with impossible colors, Anthony gathered his family and friends in the same spot where, years earlier, he had rediscovered the meaning of his life. Time had passed, but the magic of the place remained intact, perhaps even stronger. Mary Helen, her hair now as white as snow, served her traditional herbal tea as everyone shared stories and memories. The laughter and conversations blended with the natural sounds of the valley, creating perfect harmony. The legacy of Claire and Helen Vertex had grown beyond their most optimistic expectations. The valley was not just a sanctuary for wild horses and rare plants. It was a living testament that another way of life was possible, a place where ancient wisdom and progress could walk hand in hand. Wind and his golden companion watched the scene from afar, their mystical eyes reflecting the light of the setting sun. The colt, a symbol of continuity and renewal, played around them, its unique coat shining like a promise of the future. And so the valley continued its eternal cycle of renewal and protection, its stories passed down from generation to generation, its mysteries preserved by those who had learned to listen to its ancestral song. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us which city you're watching us from and stay tuned.